Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, has now gone on a Twitter blitzkrieg against India on Russian oil purchase. Navarro tried to explain the Indian oil purchase with a series of tweets and blamed the continuity of the war on Indian-Russian oil purchases. The tweets that gives very simplistic explanation on Indian oil trade avoids the complexities of global trade and is tailor-made to show that India, in fact, is responsible for the death of Ukrainians. So yet another time, after day before yesterday's interview that Peter Navarro gave to one of the news channels, he made a series of tweets of how, in fact, India is to be blamed for all the killings which are happening in Ukraine and also for funding Moscow's war. My colleague Varghese is joining us on the phone line to provide us more details on that. Varghese, we have already heard him in the interview that he called it Modi's war. He said that we are funding the war as far as Russia-Ukraine situation is concerned. What was the requirement of this tweet? It does look like he has tried simplifying it for his followers, but the situation, in fact, is far more complex.
Well, the situation is far complex. The oil trade in the world is far more complex, and the flow of money is also complex. That Peter Navarro, in fact, has not been able to explain as to why is it that we are only looking at currencies or the money that is coming from the United States alone. India does trade with other countries in the world, so does it mean that the money that is coming in from it cannot be paid for oil purchases that have to be carried out? Interestingly enough, Navarro has in fact said that the 50% tariffs were put in place to cut off the financial lifeline of this war. That is to say that India was giving Russians the money that was taken from the United States and through trade, and with that trade deficit, and it was being paid to the Russians for the discounted oil, and the Russians were in fact using that money to buy weapons and at the same time to ensure that they carry on with the war and fund it. So this is what the simplistic explanation that has been given by Peter Navarro, who is a trade analyst. Now he has in fact been saying that this has been happening from the time of Biden, and that the Biden administration turned a blind eye to what was happening. This is not the simple explanation that can be given with the simplicity of what happens on global trade front. When India purchases its oil, it has a reserve that it has to keep. So any country would do it when in its own interest and would buy from Russia, UAE, or any other country that is coming from the OPEC region that would supply oil. India had ties with Venezuela as well and has been buying oil from Venezuela as well in the past, depending upon the price. So India has always been looking at the world oil prices, and that's how we do our purchase. Fortunately, unfortunately, when it comes to the purchasing of oil, it is mostly paid in dollar terms, and that is why as the world's currency to a large extent, dollars are in fact used by India to go ahead and buy that, and most of the oil purchases across the world is carried on that front. But that doesn't mean that India is in fact funding the war in Ukraine or giving Russia its lifeline. It is a trade deal that has been happening. It's been nations that are at war do also carry on with trade with other countries, and the trade has been going on for quite some time. India also, interestingly, had a very interesting trade deal with Ukraine when the war had started. The Russians had built the naval frigate, and the engines of that frigate was with Ukraine. So both of them went ahead and committed their responsibilities to that particular defense deal that India had with. So the Russians gave the frigate, the Indians got the engines from the Ukrainians when they were at war, and these engines were supplied through a third-party country to Russia, and they fitted the engines and sent those naval ships back to India. So both of them honored that trade. So this is the complexity that is involved when it comes to trade and also defense deals. But that complexity is being made into a simplistic understanding, trying to blame the rest of the world on the war that is happening in Ukraine, which the Americans and probably Trump administration had taken steps trying to say that they would want to end it, and they would have ended it. It's been Trump's campaign also saying that this war wouldn't have happened if he was the president. So clearly enough, it's something that the Americans have been trying to use as economic pressure on the country to, in fact, cater to their whims and fancies. But the fact remains is that India has always had the strategic autonomy, whether it comes to foreign policy, its defense deals, or even when it comes to its trading partners. So Navarro's simplistic explanation does not, in fact, look into the complexities of trade. And if you look at the American trade itself, there are several questionable trades that they have done with the dictatorships of the world when they speak about democracy and freedom on one side. So the mirror needs to be shown to Peter Navarro, saying that don't be sanctimonious when it comes to Ukraine alone.
Absolutely, Varghese. Also, honestly speaking, at this point of given time, it does look like that, Donald Trump administration is completely in shatters. They are completely frustrated with the kind of bonhomie that India is sharing or is trying to share with China, and say this SEO summit is also coming. What kind of impact can we expect on the Quad because of this? Because there is a lot of confusion in the Trump administration. Somebody is being optimistic about India-US ties. They are saying that, India is biggest democracy, US is biggest economy. At the end of the day, they are going to come down to one table and sort this out. At the other hand, we are looking at Peter Navarro continuously throwing jibes towards India. What exactly is happening there?
Well, if you look at Quad, if America plans to, in fact, go and have Quad as a viable defense as they look at, you have Japan at the northern end of the Quad and India at the southern end of the Quad. And this forms a kind of arch that has the capacity to contain the rise of China. But as of now, it looks like US has abandoned the idea of containing China, because it has been looking at punishing two of its important allies in Quad, that is Japan as well as India. Japan has been trying to have a trade deal, but they have in fact called off their trade negotiator, as the United States and Japan have not been able to come onto the negotiation table, especially when it comes to Japanese goods. In fact, Japan had also given the offer to invest $550 billion in the United States, but that also stands suspended. So clearly, the tariff situation doesn't seem to be moving in a direction that, in fact, aids allies, and the U.S. seems to be withdrawing from its allies. And therefore, Quad, right now, if you look at it, is a weakened organization, with both Japan as well as India not being able to understand what is this foreign policy about. Everything is not about business, as the President Trump thinks about. It's also about geopolitics and years of understanding how geopolitics works, especially in Asia as well as across in the Atlantic. But Trump seems to be giving a very simplistic trade understanding to this.